Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents An Ever-Mounted Cavalry. Our protagonist, Ivy, has just seen several bee fairies appear in the house of her hostess and pick out sting swords with which to cope with the spy they are expecting. Ivy watched them for a few seconds, then recalled Grand Normandy's problems. She turned to Miss Blackhole. "So what did they decide? Did they pick the Queen or the Prince?" Miss Blackhole smiled. "Queen Ruth. Officially, the nobles picked her, but really, Prince Hugh—" "Oh, show her the newsreel," Melissa exclaimed. "I'd love to see it again, and Violet, Marigold, and Betch haven't seen it yet." Miss Blackhole and Lieutenant Fletcher looked at each other, shrugged, and opened a cabinet under the stairs. They took out a folding screen and an 18mm projector and began setting up. "This touches on your question about my uncle, Ivy," Miss Blackhole said, "about why he is working on spells like the one on the embroidery." Ivy watched as they set up, then helped Brother Eugene draw the curtains to darken the room. While at it, she asked, "Newsreels? When have they been watching newsreels, and why? Does Grand Normandy have its own cinemas?" He smiled. "Not a whole system, no, but we have our own news services, 3 little ones, and they circulate newsreels. If a village is all Grand Norman, or at least all Sundered, and has its own cinema, those newsreels may show up there. More usually they circulate among the noble families, and they often invite their people in for a viewing. Miss Blackhole has a projector for her work and gets the newsreels because it's important to keep her well informed. But I don't think she's used it since you came. I suppose this reel is the one where— here we go." A tinny fanfare played, and white letters appeared on the screen. "Norman Chronicle, Cinema News, English edition." An announcer spoke rapidly. "The nobles of the kingdom have gathered at Le Vignoble de Guillaume." "That's our French capital," Eugene muttered to Ivy. "In emergency session under the tightest possible security to elect the next monarch. The election is taking longer than any would wish, but the royal family has not been idle. Prince Hugh has called the assembled electors to this extraordinary meeting." The meeting was apparently outside. The picture showed a big country house with a large terrace suitable for making public announcements. Before the terrace were gathered a crowd of men and women in formal clothes. Snow lay on the roofs and trees. The people were in heavy coats. The camera took a few seconds to pan over the crowd of dignitaries. While the announcer named particular individuals, Ivy asked Eugene, "Why would they meet in France?" "When the war started, most nobles and mages stayed in France or went to France because our French holdings needed protection first. It isn't easy for us to move back and forth across the Channel, but with glamours and fairy help, it's easier than for the unsundered. When the war started, most nobles and mages stayed in France or went to France because our French holdings needed protection first. It isn't easy for us to move back and forth across the Channel, but with glamours and fairy help, it's easier for us than for the unsundered. So they went to France for the election if they weren't there already." The camera returned to a view of the terrace and pulled back. Standing at attention in front of the terrace were 4 centaurs. The barrels of their equine bodies wore horse blankets bearing a coat of arms, fleur-de-lis, and heraldic lions. The camera returned to a view of the terrace and pulled back. Standing at attention in front of the terrace were 4 centaurs. The barrels of their equine bodies wore horse blankets bearing a coat of arms, fleur-de-lis, and heraldic lions. 3 wore military dress jackets. Of the 3, 2 wore peaked hats, the round, flat-topped, short-billed hats worn in many militaries. The 3rd wore a cowboy-style Stetson. The 4th centaur wore a plain jacket, light gray, a close-fitting cowl, and a half cape thrown over the left shoulder. It was Brother Eugene. The terrace itself had flags and bunting draped over the railing so that people behind were visible only from the waist up. They were the royal family and their close court, busily identified by the announcer. At the center were a middle-aged woman in a fur coat looking tense and tired, and a young man wearing a military uniform and a stony expression. Queen Ruth and Prince Hugh, Ivy supposed, interested to see the prince after hearing his tale. The prince stood almost 2 feet taller than his mother, as if on a soapbox. He wore dress military jacket and hat. Everyone on the terrace looked serious, or taxidermied. In the same muffled acoustics as the announcer, the prince said, "As you see, there are now centaurs in Grand Normandy. These men are casualties of Desalon's treacherous attack on our negotiating party, which took the lives of my father and brother. These casualties, in cooperation with the realm's best mages and scientists, have shown us the power of centaurs, such as those who attacked them, their speed, strength, and sureness. There was a knock at the door. "Element of surprise," said Fletcher, just loud enough to be heard over the newsreel. He made shooing notions at the bee fairies. They vanished in a flurry of flickers, though Ivy noticed each left a sting sword behind, stuck between books in a bookshelf, tucked behind a chair, or propped in a dark corner. When they were all gone, Fletcher opened the door and admitted Limney. "Ah, Corporal, come in. We're just getting Ivy up to speed. She's gone and sundered herself, found out about us, but she's being quite cooperative, so as per regs, we're acquainting her with the situation." Ivy saw that Limney looked quite confused at this complex surprise. She was pretty sure this was Fletcher's aim. "Lieutenant Blackholt," said Fletcher, "would you rewind a bit so Ivy doesn't miss anything?" Miss Blackholt complied. "Shown us the power of centaurs, such as those who attacked them, their speed, strength, and sureness. We are still ignorant of the origin and fuller motives of these enemies. We do not yet know how to find them. We do not even know if Desalon attacked for reasons of its own or on behalf of Dasanenerba. We only know they assaulted us in a new way, which we must meet. We are meeting this threat with a new branch of our military, the dedicated cavalry of Grand Normandy. This project has our full support, and we join in it wholeheartedly, as you will see." Prince Hugh then came off the terrace and showed himself in full. He was now a centaur. He came around to stand before the row of 4 other centaurs. With military precision, the 5 saluted the crowd. The announcer started up again. "And so Prince Hugh founds the nation's 2nd Cavalry, with himself as its first member, a cavalry that never dismounts. Volunteers have already stepped forward, joining—" Miss Blackholt stopped the projector. "We will pause here," she said, sounding very much the teacher. "There is a lot to take in. Any questions, Ivy?" Ivy's foremost question was what was going on in Corporal Limney's head. He stared at the now dark screen, and it seemed 100 miles through it. He therefore did not see a couple of the sting swords drift through the air, taking up positions behind and to either side of him. They were hard to spot in the shaded room, especially if you were massively preoccupied. Were the Fays carrying them invisible, Ivy wondered, or being very strong bees, or just magicking them? She said, trying to come up with a more usable question. Then, "How could he change? Where did the spell come from?" "We found unused magic arrows on the battlefield," Brother Eugene told her, "and looted more off the fallen enemy." "And there are people who want to become centaurs?" "Not many," said Lieutenant Fletcher, "but some, and that's where Miss Blackholt and her uncle come in." "You see, we want to control this new spell," Miss Blackholt explained. "We want to be able to cast it for ourselves and undo it for ourselves. We can't use captured arrows forever. We only have a few dozens. My uncle, Dr. Blackholt, is working on the casting side of the problem. He has studied the spells on the arrows and watched as the volunteers get changed. That is how he was able to develop the spell on the embroidery that Lieutenant Fletcher used to take centaur appearance. He sent it to me so I can study the change and try to work it backward. And Brother Eugene is here to serve as a test subject, and because he is our best authority on how centaur bodies are made." Ivy remembered his description of the autopsy in what had sounded to her like the bottom of hell, and nodded. "But those are seemings," she said, "not transformations." She thought she understood the difference. At the last possible moment, she had avoided saying just seemings, but Miss Blackholt said it for her. "Yes, just seemings," she sighed. "Mortal magic can't do true transformation as Fays and Jinn can. It may be that with some fey help we can raise the seemings to the level of transformations, or it may be that seemings will just have to do. Ivy nodded, but she watched Fletcher rather than Miss Blackhole. Fletcher, in turn, was watching Limney, she thought. He wasn't staring, but she thought his glances were frequent and careful. "Let's start up again," he said. "There's some interesting bits coming up, Ivy." Miss Blackhole murmured, "Where were we?" wound the reel back a few turns, and started the projector again. "With himself as its first member, a cavalry that never dismounts. Volunteers have already stepped forward, joining the dedicated cavalry in great numbers." "Well, in some numbers," murmured Brother Eugene. "The new minted centaur soldiers," the announcer went on, "are being trained at the cavalry base in Upham." The screen showed 2 rows of centaurs, all in jackets like Brother Eugene's, all in cowboy hats. They stood on a snowy field with some boxy buildings in the background, facing a centaur who was an old man with a white beard and sweeping mustaches combined with a dapple gray horse. "Here we see the first class of trainees being reviewed by Lord Fitzsimmons, First Marshal General of the new dedicated cavalry, and himself a casualty of the attack in the Alps." So that was Fitzsimmons. Ivy wondered if his hip was recovered by now. "Sons of families at the pinnacle of the aristocracy have thronged to the new cavalry," announced the announcer half exclaimed. "Always looking for a place to stow extra sons," Fletcher murmured. The screen settled for a few seconds on a still picture. It showed a row of 8 centaurs of various ages, one almost as old as Brother Eugene, a couple middle-aged, the rest young or youngish. A couple had slicked back hair, a couple had mustaches, all were naked, that is, shirtless. All looked solemn and some glowered. They held their legs spread a little widely, stiffly. Ivy suspected they were not used to them yet. Then Ivy spotted another common feature. Each had a bruise on his chest. "Every male Fitzmichael," the announcer intoned, "has joined the dedicated cavalry, even though it means the end of their line if no reverse transformation is found. The Duke has joined. The Baron." Images of dignified men in suits dissolved to images of the same men as centaurs, stripped and stony-faced. Then, for a handful of seconds, the reel showed a moving image, a young boy in the 8 to 10 range on a grassy lawn. Or he had been a young boy. He was now a centaur colt, bucking and grinning, wobbling, arms spread. Because she was looking for it, Ivy was able to spot the bruise on his chest. "Every male Fitzsimmons," the announcer repeated. Fletcher nodded to Miss Blackhole, who stopped the projector. He stared at Limney. Ivy followed his gaze in time to see a pair of sting swords floating behind Limney. There was a flicker too fast to follow, as when a stage magician produces a bouquet from thin air, and a pair of bee fairies, Violet and Marigold, Ivy thought, were holding the swords. They each took a step forward. Limney whipped his head from side to side, realizing his position. "Is that the way of it, Limney?" Fletcher asked. "Are the Fitzmichaels driven by pure patriotism? Is that all? You might know, after all, you used to work for them back when they were human. Do you still? Because you do a lot more message collecting than your schedule calls for. You have, in short, a lot of explaining to do." What?" Limney stuttered. "I'm supposed to collect. You have been picking up every day except Thursday and Sunday. You are scheduled to pick up Monday, Wednesday, Friday. What about Tuesdays and Saturdays? Who are you picking up for then, Limney? Who needs the extra time? The Fitzmichaels? Does Dr. Bayard figure in this? Does the Ahnenerbe?" Limney looked stricken. "No, sir. I'm loyal, I swear." "Yes, you will swear." While staring at Limney, Fletcher beckoned Miss Blackhole, who rose and stood beside him. She stared, too. "Any wards?" Fletcher asked her. "Any absolutions or indulgences?" "This is not my field," she answered, "but I think not. Give me a moment." She went to the kitchen and returned with a tea saucer containing a little water. She glanced from it to Limney and back for a few seconds. "Nothing apparent to me. Melissa?" Melissa and the rest of her folk moved in out of the shadows, regarding Limney with detached interest. Ivy remembered Brother Eugene's description of the Thessalonians' gazes. During the confrontation, she had backed away and now stood by Brother Eugene. He put a hand on her shoulder, which felt reassuring. She found herself wishing he were in centaur form. That would be even more reassuring. It was not reassuring when he said softly to her, "Watch his hands. Be prepared to duck." But Limney, though he clenched his hands, made no move for a gun, not that he was carrying one visibly. Melissa and her folk continued their calm examination of him. Ivy took the opportunity to ask, "What's the Ahnenerbe?" Without removing his gaze from Limney, Fletcher answered cheerfully, "Ahnenerbe is German for heritage, but it's now used as the name for a Nazi think tank. It's public knowledge that they work on spinning propaganda about the Aryan master race bunk. Over here on the Sundered side, Ivy, we know there's a Sundered division of the Ahnenerbe, responsible for most of the dirty tricks Grand Normandy is fighting in the European theater. Don't think they're active in the Pacific, though we'd love to know for sure. Of course, they're very interested in the Desalon battle and all the resulting confusion." "He's wide open," Melissa announced, "or he's far better at faking than at spying." "Well, my superiors will put him under the microscope," said Fletcher, "but we may as well pump him ourselves. Now, swearing time, Limney. Yes or no, are you loyal to the Grand Norman crown?" Limney, who had been standing frozen with alarm, now drew himself up and said defiantly, "I, Christopher Cyrus Blaise Limney, swear by my name, by St. Cyrus, and on my honor as a soldier, that I am loyal to the crown of Grand Normandy." And everybody relaxed. At least, everyone but Ivy and Limney did. "Very well," said Fletcher. "How about the Fitzmichaels? Are you loyal to them?" Softly, Limney said, "Yes." "Still? Surely they released you from your service oath when you left to join up." "Yes, but are you loyal to your family just because of a service oath, sir?" There was a little pause, then Fletcher said, "Ah, good masters, are they?" Limney nodded. "To me, to my father and mother, to her mother, and if there's a conflict?" "How could there be? Haven't they sacrificed themselves to the war effort?" he asked bitterly. "And you hated to see that," concluded Fletcher. Limney scowled down at the floor. "Ivy," said Fletcher, "I will be very surprised if you don't have some new questions. Ask." "Why do you just believe him?" Ivy burst out. "Did something magical just happen? Something like the secrecy oaths we talked about?" "That's right. Every Grand Norman, when they come of age, accepts a spell, a geas it's called, that will mark them if they swear falsely. It's a magical mark, so you have to be a mage or a fey to note it." He nodded toward Miss Blackhold and then toward Melissa, "or at least have a little magical sensitivity. I'm no mage, but even I would be able to feel an oath breaking." "So would I," put in Brother Eugene, "unless there was trickery, wards or the like." "And the Fitzmichaels?" Ivy asked. "I don't understand about them." "Neither do I," said Fletcher. "Not enough, not yet. But you just want to know who they are. Limney was a footman in their house until recently. They told me that during my phone call this morning. The head of the family is the Duke of Sussex, the Grand Norman Duke, and he usually has sons and brothers and nephews who are barons. The family has married royals now and then, and some of them argue that they should be considered a branch of the royal family. Then a Fitzmichael would be eligible to be elected king. Or they used to argue. Now not a single male Fitzmichael remains human, and they certainly cannot produce heirs." "They can't have baby centaurs?" Ivy asked. Miss Blackholt shook her head. "They are horses from the waist down. Theoretically, they could father foals, but—" "Oh," said Ivy, not wanting it spelled out any further. "They did chromosome counts on sperm samples, and—" "Yes, I see," said Ivy. "No one who isn't fully human would be elected king," Fletcher added, "not unless they got restored to full humanity. There's a law dating from a time when a princess became a fey. Even without the law, mere politics would prevent it. Too many electors would feel uncertain of what they were electing." He looked at Eugene. One can argue it's unfair, but there it is. Brother Eugene shrugged. It's nothing to me. Before I was called back into service, I was settling into retirement, pottering about the cavalry stables, assisting the riding instructors, and fussing over the stud books. That's all the ambition I had. It's a very different story for the likes of the Fitzmichaels, of course, but they seem to have made their choice. What choice did they make, Limney? Fletcher asked. Why do they need you buzzing about making extra pickups? To what end? Does Dr. Bayard figure in this? Who's Dr. Bayard? Asked Ivy, hoping it was still open season on questions. Apparently it was. The Fitzmichael family wizard, Fletcher told her, and physician. His magic specialty is health and healing. Not the same as shape-shifting, but he does mess about with bodies. Then he addressed the corporal. Yes or no, Limney, are you passing information to Dr. Bayard? Are you passing information to anyone? You should know that Vanguard agents are on their way to talk to Bayard now. What? Limney abruptly held up one hand. Fletcher paused while Limney continued to stare at the floor. Finally, decision made, he looked up and said, I, Christopher Cyrus Blaze Limney, swear by my name, by St. Cyrus, and on my honor as a soldier, that what I tell you now is true. Fletcher produced a notebook, smaller than Ivy's, and a pencil. Yes, I am passing the information to Dr. Bayard, Limney said. We are not working against the Crown or against the war effort. I need the extra pickup times to break the information into smaller parcels, so I have time to copy it. If you find a way of reversing the Centaur transformation, Dr. Bayard wants to be sure he knows how to do it too, because both of us are worried that the Crown would never let the Fitzmichael men be turned back. Ah, said Fletcher with satisfaction. He finished a passage of shorthand with an emphatic stroke. But why not, when the Fitzmichaels have such dedication? The Fitzmichaels are loyal Grand Normans, Limney agreed, but that had nothing to do with their transformation. Brother Eugene said they made their choice. They didn't. The transformation was forced on them. Forced on them, Fletcher repeated. I assume you've resolved to tell us what you know and how you know it. Well then. This is going to take a while, Miss Blackholt announced. Sit, she said to Limney. I've started tea. We may as well have it. You may have done something criminally foolish. I don't know yet, but I don't believe you're an enemy. Limney sat in the nearest chair, looking not a whit more relaxed. Miss Blackholt retreated to the kitchen, beckoning Ivy to come help. When they returned with trays of cups and teapots, Melissa was the only bee-fay in evidence. She sat with a sword across her knees, but at her ease. Miss Blackholt passed around tea, then put a folded linen napkin on a table. On this she placed a silver spoonful of honey. 5 bees flew down and started sipping. Fletcher blew on his tea, put it down to cool, and poised his pencil over his notebook. Tell us about it. And Limney will tell us about it next time.